Welcome to Just Think About It with Nadine and Ben. Before we start our conversation, we have two key requests. First, if you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe via Apple, Spotify, LinkedIn, or your platform of choice. Second, we appreciate any kind notes and feedback, as well as you letting your friends know where to find us. I am really excited to introduce you to Amy Wilkinson. She's today's guest and a friend. She's the founder and CEO of Ingenuity and a faculty member at Stanford Graduate School of Business, where she focuses on high-scale entrepreneurship. While a trailblazer in her own right, she also helps other leaders shape new tech-enabled business models that deliver growth at scale, and she also teaches the next generation of business leaders in her key lessons at Stanford. Her clients have included Google, Salesforce, Cisco, Roche, Porsche, a few of the little guys, and she sits on various boards and is the global best-selling author of The Creator's Code, the 6 essential skills of extraordinary entrepreneurs. She's an expert on innovation for the World Economic Forum and an expert on leadership and small business for the Wall Street Journal. Plus, she has done way too many amazing things for me to list out today, so I'm not going to take the whole entire podcast to do that. We'll give you a bio of hers online. So let's start diving in. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Fun to be with you.
Amy, I know you teach some amazing classes such as, hacking entrepreneurship and now entrepreneurship in an existing organization. But before we get into the classes, we'd like to delve into your book a little bit, your global bestseller, and let's set the stage. You interviewed, it sounds like, 200 of the top entrepreneurs and distilled their mindsets and skill sets and to really understand how did they scale a breakout business. So perhaps you can walk through the process of researching your book and why you started on that endeavor in the first place. What spurred your passion?
Okay. So I started on this project after I was a White House Fellow, which is a leadership program in government. I had worked in the trade office, which now we're obviously upending lots of
Does it
generations,
exist? Does it exist?
decades of trade policy. But the fellowship was started by a man named John Gardner, and he had written a number of leadership books. And so I was inspired to do that. I originally was an English major as an undergraduate. I have a sociology master's in organizational behavior. So I thought leaving the White House, I would do a sabbatical before I came back to business. I would interview what I thought originally were next generation leaders and look at this next generation of leadership question. But it very quickly became an entrepreneurship mindset skill set. And I took the age cap off. I had thought originally it was people under 40 years old. And as I was out interviewing people, the research started to show me that breakout companies, lots of them, the founders were over 40. They were 42, 45. And I met Bill Drayton, who had been the father of social entrepreneurship. He was in his 70s at the time. I was like, wow, this is not in the age demographic. So I redirected the research, and instead of, having a demographic, it's a psychographic, and it's all about how to be entrepreneurial, create and scale new ideas. So that was the genesis of going off to write a book. I thought it would take 18 months. It ended up taking 5 years,
Okay.
which, nobody tells you if you're going to write a big research-based ideas book, it's really bigger than a dissertation. I did the work at Harvard. I was in the Center for Business and Government. I set out a bunch of criteria, which basically where you had to start and scale a business to $100 million in revenue. I wanted 5 years of history, not more, really break out high scale entrepreneurship companies. I wanted to look across industries and sectors. So it's not just tech. Many of the tech businesses are in this data set. So founders of LinkedIn, Airbnb, Dropbox, et cetera, up and down Silicon Valley, but also founders of Chobani, Under Armour, Spanx, Chipotle, JetBlue as an airline, et cetera. So I was looking across the United States and across sectors to try to come up with the mindset skill set to drive a breakout startup. And then Simon & Schuster brought my book out globally, and Stanford Business School gave me a faculty role. So I came back to the West Coast.
Awesome. Well, we're glad you're out here. We've got you back here.
When you wait 1 second, Nadine, when you were doing that and you were saying it was 18 months to turn into 5 years, so you ended up having to get a PhD in essence of writing this book. Like, was there a point where you were like, hey, I don't know if I want to do this anymore? Or like, that's a long time. That's a big piece of your life. Like, I just, before we go on, like, just touch on like that process of doing something so monumental and how that was as like to go through.
It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I mean, let's say I've been an M&A banker on Wall Street for JP Morgan. I've been in the White House. I've started and sold a company before, et cetera. Writing a book by far was the hardest thing I've done. And, it just sort of took on a life of its own. I started doing interviews and then they led to more interviews. I had a couple academic advisors. Tom Friedman had written The World is Flat, from the New York Times. He was a friend and mentor. He was saying to me, go out and interview 100 people. You'll get 5 chapters. Clay Christensen was a mentor. He's no longer living, unfortunately, at Harvard. He was saying, you have to have real rigor behind the research. I was getting lots of different inputs. And in order to sort of do what I considered to be a high quality job, it took a long time. And the other thing is, before you can write a book, you have to write a bunch of articles. So, people don't believe. I had been at McKinsey. I'd written a lot for McKinsey. I'd written for the trade office in the White House, but that's not your own byline. So I was writing articles for Bloomberg Business Week, for The Economist, for the Washington Post. CNN.com at the time had a huge audience on it, still does. But you had to publish articles before getting a literary agent. You had to get a literary agent before getting a very large publisher. And then this journey actually was extended out by almost 2 years at the end, because I'm under Simon & Schuster. Random House and Penguin merged, and Simon & Schuster shut the imprint I was under. And I got reassigned to a new editor in the main house and had to rewrite the book for a new editor.
Wow.
Oh boy.
Wow.
There
Oh my
were all
gosh.
kinds of setbacks. And the tale, my brother is saying to me, write a screenplay about the blonde girl who doesn't give up, because the better story is the book behind the book. And there's all kinds of craziness but not to distract us from this, but it was really hard. And then at every moment, I just sort of was so dedicated to putting what I considered a contribution into the world of, here's the mindset that anyone could create and scale their own idea, that I just stayed very committed to it.
But it is
But I like
interesting
it.
though.
Go
It
ahead.
is interesting though, because as I've been an entrepreneur since I was 27, and like it doesn't always go well for you. And like when you work at McKinsey or you work at Goldman or you work at, you name the big firm, things are kind of laid out for you, you're taken care of. But when you're on your own project, there is something that before we talk about what you found, you have to just admire the diligence to go through that process and create something, whether it's a business or it's a book or whatever. Golf clap to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It felt like being an entrepreneur. I was interviewing all these entrepreneurs and I was struggling with my own project, right? And when the book finally got published after these significant delays, for reasons really outside my control, all of my friends showed up. And this is one of the wonderful things when you have friends that are sort of like asking you, what are you doing? Why is this taking so long? I had done everything pretty fast in my career, and this thing just, kept sucking in more time. That finally, when it came out, it was amazing, because worldwide people hosted book talks
Oh,
and,
nice.
corporate events. And so that it was a real reward. And I will also say that the biggest benefit that, to me out of the book were people that would write me that I didn't know. Like, the best thing about writing a book is all the people that come into your life. I guess I'll say that. And for example, there was a window washer in the UK who wrote me a long email, and he said to me, I'm 72 years old. I've been washing windows for 50 years. I never thought I could be an entrepreneur, but I read, your book. I'm a creator. I see the world differently because of this book that I read, and I'm following your social media. You're all over the world, and you're, doing things that I won't do, but I see through your eyes sort of how I can be different. And so that was like really powerful. That I had a single mother who was a military spouse and she was writing to me, or an Uber driver. It was really interesting to see the reach of that book in terms of inspiring people way beyond the set of interviewees or Stanford MBAs or small sort of group of people. It was really very touching.
I think that, when I look at the first lesson you cover, right? You looked at an opportunity, you spotted something, you're thinking differently. You're talking about people, whether it's looking through the lens of your eyes or thinking about their own opportunities that they see. The lesson is find the gap. What are the key takeaways that you would tell our listeners, our audience, that from that first lesson about either what the entrepreneurs are doing or what could they do to be better at finding the gap?
Yeah. So that's the first skill. And what my research ends up showing is there's 3 patterns by which you can find a gap. Anyone can do this. I'm often asked, is this a nature versus nurture question? Or, are people born entrepreneurs? I don't think so. I think there are some that really do start early. So part of the research, Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn and the great investor, and now Inflection AI, and he's doing, so many different companies. He was doing video game entrepreneurship in his teens. So was Elon Musk. He and his brother had started companies and stuff. So there are certain people that are starting really early, but the important thing is you can start at any age, at any time. And I'll give you the three techniques that I really see entrepreneurs do. One is what I'm calling being a sunbird. So that's like a hummingbird. It's the Australian word for hummingbird. You pick up a concept that already exists in one place, you fly it over, and you reapply it somewhere else.
Okay.
So the best example of that we all relate to is Starbucks, which is Howard Schultz does not invent coffee culture. He goes to a conference in Italy. He sees it. He sees that if home is your first place and office or work is your second place, the third place you go is to a coffee house in Italy. There was a lot of community. People liked being there. It didn't exist in the States at the time. So he picks up this third location. It becomes the basis of the Starbucks business. And he flies it back into Seattle and he starts Starbucks. It's a lift and shift model. So, and they continue to do that. So their Starbucks Via, the instant coffee.
It's like Nescafe.
Yeah. That's a medical technology out of the big cancer research center in Seattle of freeze drying blood cells. And they take that medical technology and they apply it to coffee. And they say, we'll move this over here and we'll make a better product. So any one of us can look for things that already work. You look for an existing model and then you reapply it. So that would be one way to spot a gap. A second way is to solve a problem. And so we all are bumping into problems all the time, right? Friction points, bottlenecks, things that irritate you, things that irritate your friends.
Yeah.
And most of us just get really agitated by that. Entrepreneurial people will flip that and basically say, where there's a problem, there's an unaddressed need. And so that's a huge opportunity. And then the way to tackle that is to reason by first principles, meaning break that problem down, examine every assumption, every element of it, really probe what the pieces of the problem are, and then build piece by piece from the ground up a new solution. This is what Elon Musk has talked about a lot with SpaceX, with Tesla, with the Boring Company. If you look at his businesses, they are solving problems and he's breaking problems down to make a reusable rocket. For example, with SpaceX, we just saw them rescue astronauts from the International Space Station. He has built something a different way, but that was originally seeing a problem and then creating a new solution. And then the third way of finding a gap or spotting an opportunity is at the intersection. So if you put two things together that haven't been put together before, a lot of novelty is created.
Sure.
So examples here, if you have surfing and sailing. So people have been surfers for a long time. People have been sailors for a long time. You put that together and you get windsurfing or kiteboarding, whole new sport, right? Porsche is a client for my business and they're an example of basically putting together an all-terrain vehicle, like a four-wheel drive that you'd see in the Rocky Mountains, and a luxury town car, like you'd see in Manhattan. When you put that together, you get luxury SUV. That's the Porsche Cayenne. It's their number one revenue generator. And it is for almost all car, it's not specific to one brand. You see a lot of luxury SUVs, but that didn't exist before. That was putting two things together.
Right.
Chipotle is the beginning of fast and casual dining. So that's a revolutionary model that we now see all kinds of fast casual restaurants, but Chipotle was the first.
And burritos and the prices of fine dining. That's the other two things that they put together.
I think it's pretty affordable. I was in a Chipotle the other night. I'm like, wow, this is a massive amount of food.
Teenagers.
I think, wait. Chipotle was affordable. I think
Yeah.
post-COVID, it's become less affordable. They definitely have taken some price in the Chipotle model, but that's off topic. I want to ask you something. Different. So solving a problem and then figuring it out and then putting these people together. But what about like you girls are both Silicon Valley people. Let's think about like General Magic, the guys who were some of the early guys, one of the first like pre-revenue tech companies. They had a genius idea. They had the iPhone before the iPhone. They had a lot of Apple people. Isn't sometimes timing a huge part of it? You could do all the math and have the problem, but if you don't have the timing, Like, can't that be just a component of it? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, certainly there are outside factors, but hopefully this 6 skills framework that came out of all this research is allowing you to develop your own skills so that you can put a product into the market that meets the timing.
Right.
So, part of it is also taking in feedback, building out your team with cognitive diversity, like doing other things that would align you with what the market interest is at the time. And, people ask me, oh, well, isn't there a lot of luck in this? And I would say, yeah, for entrepreneurship, there's always luck. I mean, for life, there's luck, but there's also preparing yourself to meet those opportunities, right? So I would say it's a yes and to that question.
Right. But I guess like Steve Jobs is always like, I'll tell the market what it wants versus listening to the market. What do you think about that, like, duality?
So that's sort of skill number 2, which is called drive for daylight. And this is this long horizon view where you want to have this vision of what you want. So Steve Jobs was amazing with that. I didn't interview him because he was getting very sick while I was doing the research for this book. I interviewed people all around him that had worked directly with him. But one of the things that I'll say that he's amazingly revolutionary in is the ability to look forward and never back. So this is part of skill number 2, which is what I'm calling avoid nostalgia. Like, you can't be nostalgic. You can't be emotional. You have to be able to say the future is going this direction. So Steve Jobs, for example, cannibalized his own business when he said music will be on iTunes on the phone, and he immediately cannibalized the iPod. Most leaders can't do that. Most leaders are not willing to destroy their own current product for the future product. He was able to do that. Or Reed Hastings at Netflix. Like, I don't know how many people remember, but the DVD by mail business.
Yeah. The red envelope, you were so excited when it came. So excited, right? And a lot
Right.
of people
That
stuck
was
with it, right?
exciting.
I remember that a lot of people stuck with it and did not want to go online.
They didn't want to go to streaming. That
Right.
almost killed that business.
Right? They did a division, right? Like he tried to do a split off of the company,
They
which
had
he,
to go back.
yeah.
Yeah. They reversed and he went back and said, okay, we'll still do DVD by mail and we'll phase it in a lot closer, because he got knocked down very hard by existing customers with that one.
Hmm.
But they obviously phased in slower and they went towards the future, which is streaming. And now they've gone towards content. Right. And so that's one of these great visionary skills of entrepreneurs, is you have to be able to look forward. And, yes, you have to take consumer feedback in, but you also have to have a vision for where you want to go.
Okay, so lesson number 3 is the OODA loop. I don't know if I pronounced that right. OODA loop. Like, not to be confused with the Oompa Loompas. The OODA
Yeah.
loop.
No, come on, Ben. Obviously, many of us know the OODA loop, but maybe you can define it first and then walk through the takeaways here.
Yeah. Yeah.
We try to keep
So,
it light here. It's a Friday.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
right.
So the OODA loop stands for observe, orient, decide, act. It's originally a fighter pilot mantra. I had been in DC and I knew a couple fighter pilots and learned quite a lot about this. It was John Boyd's framework. He's known as 30-second Boyd. He could shoot down an opposing fighter jet in 30 seconds or less. And legend has it he never lost. And so the way that they train fighter pilots is to observe with like extreme alertness. I mean,
Sure.
imagine you're in a fighter pilot cockpit, right? And you orient, you try to integrate as much information as you can, as fast as you can. And then you decide, you take a decision and action. And even if you are a split second ahead of a competitor, you change the dynamics of a fight. Right. And that is the same basic dynamic that we see in Silicon Valley with entrepreneurs, called fast cycle iteration, right? You're moving through observe, orient, decide, act as quickly as you possibly can in order to have your competitors responding and you sort of dominating the cycle. You learn faster. You get inside the learning loop of a competitor. So that's what the concept is.
Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, Nadine and I are both traders, right? And it's very similar in trading, right? Especially recently, where things are moving so fast, tariffs, no tariffs, and like things. So it is very similar of like being able to observe and decide, and you're not going to have full information, so you just have to go with an action. So, we both understand that quite well. It's a very interesting concept.
But
Yeah.
what are the takeaways to, like, can someone get better at it? What do they do?
Right. So I'll give you a couple examples. So Amazon, Jeff Bezos put in a framework about one-way versus two-way doors. And this is all about a one-way door, a one-way decision would be for Amazon, the acquisition of Whole Foods. You're only going to do it once, right? You're not going to come back around and do it again. So you need to be slow. It needs to have senior time, a lot of due diligence, etc. But the vast majority of all business decisions are two-way doors. So, for example, you launch a product, it's a flop, you just relaunch. You do a marketing campaign, your slogan doesn't work, you just do it again. You hire someone that's not right for that job, you fire them, you hire the next person. Like, this is a two-way door. I'd say 90% of the decisions that are made in business are two-way doors. And so you can push that decision making out to the front lines or to people that work for you because you know you can always recover. It's this fast cycle. You just make another decision versus believing that you have to make every decision as if it were a one-way door. And so that's something that we teach at Stanford Business School. We, put students in scenarios and say, okay, how quickly do you need to make this decision, or what would impede you from doing it as a two-way door? So that's kind of a rubric to help you think through, can I make these decisions faster?
And I think that third lesson about the OODA loop relates to your fourth, which is about failing wisely, right? Is that I guess you have to be a little bit self-reflecting to know if you're failing. A lot of people always believe, right? But how does someone make sure they're not doing the colossal fail? So I don't know. I know you talk a bit about failure ratios, small bets to test, resilience, like various things, but maybe break down what could people take away to be able to fail wisely, because we all fail, but some people don't even want to recognize it. So is there like emotional intelligence you have to have in addition to other more maybe data related concepts that they can take away?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest takeaway here is the failure ratio, and you mentioned it. But what I can see is that these, extremely successful entrepreneurial leaders, they are often setting a ratio before they even start a project. So, for example, 1 in 3 things we try isn't going to work. That's what we want. Like 33% of the experiments we have here are going to fail. We're going for that. Or 1 in 4 things, or 1 in 10. What you want to avoid is a 0 ratio or a perfect record. Because if you're without any setbacks or experiments or learning things, you're probably not doing anything new. And so if you, conceptually for yourself and for your team, if you have a conversation and say, hey, 1 in 5 things we're going to try here is going to flop, and that means we're successful, it frees up and it sort of raises the stigma off of failure being a bad thing and instead making it a learning. And then the biggest thing is you want to translate the learnings back into the business. So, in a lot of cultures, people don't want to report where they messed up. I failed in some way. What you want to do is set a culture that says, no, that's what we want. We just don't want to fail the same way over and over. So report that as fast as you can. That's hitting our target. Learn from this setback and we'll translate it into a success. So, I guess all failure is not equal. You want to have new failures. You want to have incremental failures, not catastrophic, meaning you want small experiments. So there's just a way to approach things that is a risk management strategy, and it's a mindset for making sure you learn as fast as you can, and your team does.
And,
And
one of the
having
ways,
just
Ben, give me a second, because
All right.
this is really key, I'd say, to the investment business. So there'll be non-investors listening to this, investors listening to this. It probably reflects on a lot of people and what they do. Is that like in our business, an investment business, I mean, if you get over 50% right, often that, you're doing a good job, right? Because in investing, you're losing all the time. So to be in our business long term, you have to be very comfortable with what you're talking about. Losing a lot, losing often, trying to minimize those mistakes, learning from them, not doing it again, sizing the bets appropriately, right? If you call them trades or bets or whatever, positions you want to talk about. But what I found from hiring people over the last 30 years is that most people emotionally aren't ready for that. So maybe they're okay with a failure ratio of 5%, right? But they're not okay with a very large failure ratio emotionally. And so, is there something people can do to, whether it's building resilience or knowing themselves enough to know, well, maybe I can't be an entrepreneur because I just don't like failing, right? It's just something I'm not comfortable with. Or what kind of advice do you give to people on that more soft angle?
Yeah, I think it's a reframe. So this is again where it's a mindset. Instead of thinking that failure is so hugely catastrophic, where if you get one trade wrong, if you get one bet wrong, that's not a problem. What you have to avoid is a whole string of them of the same error.
Right.
So I'll give you, so Elizabeth Holmes is in my data set with fairness, right? Which how much do I wish she wasn't, but this book came out 10 years ago. But I teach a whole class at Stanford about failing incrementally versus failing catastrophically.
Right.
That's a catastrophic fail,
Right.
right? Where, there's an integrity violation where you lose the entire business, where you end up in jail. I mean, that's a heroic failure. Versus incremental failures, which in the investing space, or I like to say, in the venture capital space, you're really
Sure.
only getting it right 30% of the time.
Right.
Or baseball, like the greatest hitters in baseball have a 300 average or something. So
Sure.
there are different places for people if they have different risk appetites, but the idea is just to not fail catastrophically.
Right.
And so it's all about learning through incremental experiments, really,
Okay.
and being honest and reporting,
Well,
again.
that's hard too. That was one of the parts that I found when I hired some people maybe who hadn't been in the business long, so they didn't have that practice of also being open, transparent with the failures, really wanting to learn from them, changing behavior versus that hiding approach, right? And so some businesses, I guess I would say maybe if there's a really high failure rate, some people just have to know themselves enough to know that they're just not comfortable with that, right? Because doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good, right?
It
But once
never
you get
feels
used to
good.
it over time, you're just kind of used to it and you laugh at yourself. But most people don't start off with big failure rates in their life.
Yeah,
But you know what? Go ahead.
I would say that being an entrepreneur is uncomfortable almost all the time.
Right.
Right. And so that's, a misperception. I think there's a lot of hero worship now in the media and in our culture about how great entrepreneurs are. But if you really spend time, if you are an entrepreneur, if you spend time with entrepreneurs, it is not an easy journey. I mean, it is setbacks all the time. There are mistakes all the time. There are pitching other people that you can do things that don't believe you. There's building a brand when it's against an entrenched competitor. It's a real sort of challenge where you believe, and this was the conclusion of the book, you believe in your work enough that it matters, that you can continue to persevere. You really have to believe that what you're building will change the world for someone else, that it will improve lives of other people, that it's really a needed in the world, or you wouldn't be able to sustain the setbacks because it's a challenging path.
Without question. And it's one of those things where unless you go down that road where you don't have someone taking care of you and like you and again, the entrenched competitor is a great point, right? The people who've been winning, the rent seekers, the legacy
The
winners,
Nikes
they,
of the world.
yeah, exactly. Like the legacy winners, the coal industry, the newspaper industry, whatever, they're not interested in not winning anymore, right? Like Elon is got the hero status because he disrupted two industries, right? He disrupted the car industry and the energy industry, right? And
Well, and
so
before that,
Rocket.
PayPal, right? I mean, he's disrupted multiple sectors. That's why I think he's one of the greatest entrepreneurs, certainly of our time, because most entrepreneurs stay in one sector. They're all fintech, or they're all medical devices, or they're all, name the sector. Elon actually applies this mindset across sectors, in auto, in aerospace, in online finance, with the Boring Company, now with AI. Like, it's pretty extraordinary. I do think he's tangling up in the political sphere.
Right.
well,
This
the
might be the
political
one failure. This might be his 20%, right?
the political sphere is a difficult place. I mean, look, you work for the White House. You probably know more than any of us do. That is a different game than the private sector, without question. But to just come back to it, it's like if we're thinking about you're disrupting things. Hey, I'm writing a book that's going to tell you what these entrepreneurs who have succeeded. The general mindset is always persistence, right? Like it's so easy to give up. When you're on your own, you don't have anybody else. I mean, maybe you have your family or your wife or your, whatever, but like you don't have like the infrastructure there. It's like you have to somehow mentally go to a spot and be like, I'm going to win. And to Michael Jordan's point, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, to kind of bow tie what we were just talking about. And it's just not that many humans are built like that in essence. Is that kind of what you think, or am I wrong?
No, I think at the extreme, that's right. I think that you can have this mindset. Like, so I'm on the side of believing that we can all be more entrepreneurial, that you can inject an entrepreneurial mindset, even if you work in an established company, right? That you can still be spotting opportunities and making fast decisions and failing wisely and doing things. I think to be a founder, and especially going up when the odds are so against you in starting and scaling businesses, yeah, that takes a real determined and very headstrong person. You have to be willing to go against the norm, and you have to be willing to stand up after you've failed multiple times, right? So it is, there's something sort of special about the personality type that's very willing to do that. But I think we can all be more entrepreneurial. There's, it's sort of on a gradient here. I think everyone can be an entrepreneurial thinker.
And when we look at the fifth lesson about having a network mind, right? So I think this maybe is less controversial, maybe better well known, of just diverse brain power, diverse skill sets, right? If you're going to build something extraordinary, and you kind of mentioned it too, is finding the intersection of two things. Well, then usually you need some experts or people who know something, cross-sectional about various industries, various skill sets, technologies, whatever it is. So are there any additional factors you would say about whether how to have a network mind? Is it more about just being open to different ideas, or how does someone, flex that muscle a bit?
Yeah. So I think what you want to look for is somebody who's trained differently, right?
Okay.
And so if I'm trained as an English and political science undergrad and a sociology master's degree, I probably want to partner with an MIT PhD in math, because that is very different from my training. Right. And so you want to be looking for the lens that someone's brain brings to solving a problem. I have thought since I published this book that, like, the conversation is often the wrong conversation that we're having about diversity, because it's about what we look like on the outside.
Right.
And it's cognitive diversity that really solves problems. So everybody who looks one way could be trained very differently, and they would solve problems, or everybody who looked very different could have the exact same training. And then you've got, the same problem solving ability. So what you're looking for here is the cognitive diversity point. And so this is not a fast thing to figure out often about people. You have to have different conversations with them to see, how do they approach a problem? Are they a convergent thinker? Are they a divergent thinker? Are they an introvert? Are they an extrovert? How are they going to come at helping advance your business? You can look for their training, but then you should also look for the way they think.
Right.
And it takes some time to evaluate if that person is bringing a problem solving approach that's different from what you have. And that's what you want. I guess I'll give one more. There's a really interesting piece of research that I put in that chapter of the book, which Catherine Phillips, who was trained at Stanford and then was the dean at Columbia, she's unfortunately no longer living. She had breast cancer, but one of her studies is cited in this book, which is all about bringing an opposition point of view into your group.
Okay.
So, and the easiest way to talk about this is, if you're all Republicans and you bring a Democrat into the group, it makes everybody uncomfortable. And that person may or may not bring the nugget to solve the problem, but everybody feels awkward because they have this very different point of view. Or if you have all Democrats and you bring a Republican in. She did it originally with fraternities and sororities and did research, or, different groups of business people. But when you bring the outsider in, the counterintuitive finding out of this research is that person doesn't bring the nugget of knowledge. That person makes everybody work harder. Everybody then sits up in their chair, articulates their point of view, applies their brain to solving the problem. When you're challenged, you bring your best game forward. And if you're not challenged, you get kind of cognitively lazy. And so in this way, it basically shows that if you bring an outside perspective in, it makes every single person better. It doesn't make.
Everyone's leveling up, you're saying,
Right.
with that diversity.
That's
So
right.
that's like, you don't want yes men around you, in essence, right? Like, having the guy who's willing to say the opposite kind of
That's right.
makes you have to, like, establish yourself, defend your just think about it, if you will, Nadine. Like, in essence, you have to step up your game, and that's right. Competition's a good thing, right? It ultimately makes us all better.
That's right. And so that's, like, this study was, the pain is worth the gain, was the kind of tagline of it, meaning it will be uncomfortable for you. It will be somewhat painful. You'll have a challenger. People will, tell you you're wrong, maybe. But
Or
that,
ask for clarification, right? It's just like
right,
you kind of believe something, but when someone makes you explain it or what's the data behind that, then you go look and you're like, okay, well, maybe it wasn't exactly that, right? Or they kind of loop
that's
it
right,
around and say, well, I guess it could be this, right? So you start
right.
to broaden your horizon a little bit,
But
right?
it makes you think harder. And so therefore it makes you a better professional, right?
Right. All right. So Amy, the sixth lesson is gifting small goods. Well, like what is
I like that,
role?
Ben. Are you going to gift me some small goods?
I do. I sent you lots of gifts.
The
You know,
socks is
I
a
love.
perfect example.
I
The
send you
Bombas
snacks
socks,
and golf and flowers. I
flowers.
love my
Yes,
partner.
yeah.
She's the best.
Yeah.
But okay, let's
We're
focus.
just kidding.
What is the
Bombas
role of
socks, they're the best.
Bombas socks are the best, aren't
They're
they?
the
I
best.
totally agree. I got Nadine on that, and she now agrees that
Yeah.
Bombas socks. So this is now a marketing commercial for Bombas that we're not getting paid for. But if Bombas wants to sponsor our podcast,
There
please
you go.
contact us. So let's talk about Amy's, like sixth lesson, and then the role of generosity in
Yeah.
entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So a small good would be a small piece of assistance, a small favor, something that helps someone else, costs you very little, but is valuable to someone else, a piece of assistance. So what does that look like? It could look like forwarding a resume, writing a few lines of code, critiquing a proposal, helping someone prepare for an interview, etc. This was a conversation originally that I started with Reid Hoffman, and it's part of the basis of LinkedIn, which is if we are all on an economic grid or a graph, it's very easy to forward somebody for an opportunity. It's very easy to be helpful to another professional. The opposite is also true, which is it gets harder to burn someone if we're all linked together, right?
Right.
And so I think of the six skills, this is the most counterintuitive. And as a sociologist, I think it's really very cool that transparent reputation is putting pressure on better behavior. So because your reputation is known, if you are gifting small goods, if you're helping build others' success, information comes to you, deal flow comes to you, talent comes to you, people want to work with you. Like it actually makes you a stronger professional. Again, the opposite is true, which is if you're hoarding resources, if you're cheating, if you're lying, people will know that more transparently, and they will cut you off. They will say, I don't want to work with you anymore. There's a Harvard study that shows if you are a defector and you do get isolated and cut out, you're 4 times more likely to try to get back in by collaborating. Because if you were just out for yourself and then, people didn't like that, then all of a sudden you turn as aggressively as you can to be collaborative.
That's too funny.
Yeah. So
Right.
People can learn that.
But
people can learn
isn't
that.
go ahead, sorry.
People can learn that. I think of it like a 5-minute favor, right? Like I can do somebody a 5-minute favor, costs me very little, helps them. If I connect, someone to a board role, that's easy for me to do. And maybe it really helps the board and helps the candidate. That would be a small good, gifting it.
And so the transparency thing's interesting because I had just watched the show Narcos, and I don't know if you've ever seen that before, but it was talking about corruption in politics. And like I was thinking about what you just said that it's like politicians are so transparent, right? Like we know these people are, but doesn't something of that like build this ability for scandal? If it's so transparent, but you want to still do something on the side that it can underlie it, and then humans are like so attracted. Like we've seen scandals like, for example, with Elizabeth
Holmes.
from Theranos, right? And you interviewed her. So like
Right.
maybe talk to that, for example.
Scandals. Yeah. So I think that often people can deceive you, right? But I think with transparent reputation, which is, in 24 hours, I can find out a whole lot about almost anyone. I can Google them. I can get on social media. I can see them on, X, Twitter, or Facebook, or Instagram, or whatever. I can find somebody that knows them. I can ask that person, are they a good colleague or not? The transparency of our reputation in the last 5 to 10 years has changed the ability for people to swindle you, right? It still will happen. And I think part of what we're having now is there are no facts behind a lot of the different media outlets, right? Or people have totally different versions of what's true or what's not true. So that's a problem. But still, with the ability to reference check someone, I mean, anyone that was in business school in Nadine's class or my class, like I can find out very quickly about their professional reputation.
Right.
Right.
Well,
In fact, it's
absolutely.
almost like you don't even what I actually liked about LinkedIn, if you're doing it on a localized basis or your industry basis, you can quickly see who they're connected with and almost have a sense of the person, right? Like without even calling anybody, you can be like, oh, if they're connected to those 20 people, those are high caliber people in terms of their values or experience or whatever. It's like, and I know they don't necessarily connect with everyone, right? So there's some aspects to that where you can quickly get a sense of somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, like just going back to the Theranos thing or Sam Bankman-Fried or some of these people, there are people who can deceive us, right? Like, and you know, we do the due diligence and they deceive us. Like, though, like and it's actually weird. I've sent Nadine this. Like, if we look at the 30 under 30, it's like 4 or 5 of the 30 under 30 were like fraudsters. So is it that we want to believe in them, or they're just that good at marketing, or like what is it that, like, you know, creates these people who we celebrate because they're, I don't know, like they're telling people what they want to hear and they're able to harness resources towards it, but like it's based on air. I mean, what do you think about that part of
Well,
this?
yeah. So what I think about that is there was very little due diligence done on Sam Bankman-Fried or Elizabeth Holmes. If you actually look at the investors that put money behind, they were like lemmings, right? There were all these people that said, "Oh, I need
Just
to get in."
jumped in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and didn't reference check and didn't call other professionals or didn't with Theranos, there was no one on that board that had any kind of diagnostic or scientific background. That's a huge red flag. I mean, they had
Yeah, when you say that, for sure.
right? They had, the former Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, and they had a policy focus to try to take that technology into the public policy domain. But now, in retrospect, looking at that, there would have been no one that could have oversight on that business because nobody had worked at Quest Diagnostics or, name whatever industry could have had some oversight on Theranos. So what I think has happened, whether it's the 30 under 30 list or some of these people, they have fallen, so they have been caught, but not as quickly as you might have assumed. And I think most people didn't do any due diligence. They just sort of bought into the hype. So
Also,
that's
I'm a big believer you learn more about someone. Sometimes people haven't had money, fame, or power/control yet, right? And so until they have that, there's just no data points. And so you could, someone can be seemingly a great person or have good morals, but they haven't had that element yet. So that hasn't been unlocked either for themselves to even know, right? Or others to know. Similarly, big failures, like public failures, those types of things. So, in some ways, too, if you get someone earlier in their career, they just might not have had the opportunity to even test that realm yet.
they don't have a track record versus somebody who's a couple generations later. Yeah. I mean, it's one thing that I'm telling younger people that want to co-found a business. It's always good to have a co-founder, 2 or 3, not a solo founder, right? And if you are looking for a co-founder, you want to spend real time with those people before you decide to do that. So there are plenty of things that we see at Stanford of like, oh, I'm a business person and you're an engineer. Great,
Right.
let's co-found a company. No, really what you want to do is spend months of time with that person, solving problems, understanding how they are under stress, anticipating if the light shines on you, that could be good or it could be terrible. Somebody
Right.
could be taking all the credit, right? So you
Right.
want to try to know somebody that you're getting into business with. And Peter Thiel had said to me when I was doing this whole book that prehistory matters. Like you want to try to look at the history they have before they come into this venture.
Right.
So did Nadine, to the point you're saying, like, what were they doing before? What decisions did they make? What teams were they on? How did they conduct themselves? Like all that prehistory is really important to understanding who they are.
And maybe let's jump to ingenuity right now. Maybe describe for people what that is and that what areas do you tackle for folks?
Yeah. So this is our company. This simply came out of the book tour and it was kind of a surprise. Very large companies came to me and said, "Hey, we need the entrepreneurial mindset or skill set. Can you please help us?" And these are huge businesses saying, "Work with all of our vice presidents." And like, wow, how do you do that? Or
Yes.
make our workforce entrepreneurial. And
Yeah.
so for the first like year and a half, I didn't respond to it. I was a first time writer and a first time faculty member. And then I got together with some of my friends. I had been at McKinsey before and JP Morgan. And so we have a small team. And what we do is we go into very large businesses
Right.
and we help them figure out how to drive growth. So sometimes it's strategic. A lot of times it's workshops around mindset, skill set, Now there's a lot around Gen AI. How do these tools unlock a lot of innovation in these
Sure.
big companies? So we do different types of kind of strategic innovation projects, and our clients tend to be pretty large or private equity that has a lot of portfolio companies that they want to accelerate.
Okay. And
Sometimes that,
so when you're doing that, is it mostly, I mean, are you bringing the tech skill sets or do they have them if you're really focused on AI, which obviously there's so many people trying to figure out what to do there. How do you go in? Is it more unlocking their processes, their mindset, or what is it?
it's more mindset, skill set, organizational structure.
Okay.
It's on that side. And then we partner often with the tech teams. So there are,
Right.
like at the very big institutions, they have their own AI. They're
Sure.
building their own
Right,
LLMs,
right,
right?
right.
And so we are a partner with the internal AI division to try to make sure that the workforce is upskilled and reskilled and ready.
And I know that just from our prior discussions, you're tinkering with another book or thinking about either new classes or an update. What's on deck next for you, Amy?
Yeah. So there are two different book ideas. And I think I'm going in the direction of going back to this six skills framework 10 years later. This book came out in 2015.
Right.
And looking at the mega breakout that happened between 100 million in revenue and now, very large businesses, going back to the founders of Airbnb and Dropbox and LinkedIn, Palantir, before anybody really tracked
Sure.
what Palantir was. I'm going to interview Elizabeth Holmes in jail, hopefully. I mean, we're
But
hoping to
that
interview.
would be, yeah, you
That'd be
got that's
very
it. That's
cool.
actually that's your
You
screenplay,
could
but
get
go
that in
ahead.
Netflix.
Yeah.
You should
Yeah.
call Reed and be like, "Hey, I'll
That's
do a
better
Netflix
than Meghan
special."
Markle. Definitely. I would watch that. I would watch that. I've not seen the,
Yeah.
I don't know, From You with Megan or whatever, but I would watch that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and going back and trying to understand what have they learned over 10 years, and especially in the mega breakout successes, what does it take to go that next level? How do you continue to build your team out? And so that's the six essential skills is basically the framework for the next book.
But Amy, anything else you would like the audience to know about that you're working on? Anything that they could do to either keep in touch with you, to stay abreast of the research you're doing, take a class from you? How do they engage?
Yeah, fantastic. So, in the last 18 months, my focus is still very much entrepreneurship innovation, but it has also shifted towards AI,
Right.
right? And so I have an AI newsletter. You can definitely
Okay.
sign up there.
Where do people get that?
So the place to go is amywilkinson.com. That is my author website. You can send messages there. You can sign up for the newsletter there. You can see sort of the new projects that are going on. There's also Ingenuity Corp. That's the
Uh-huh.
business website. So you can, if you're interested in, working with our company, that's where you go is ingenuitycorp.com. I'm also very findable at Stanford. So unfortunately, our classes are closed to students. I get asked all the time if people come and sit in classes.
I bet your
Yeah,
classroom would be packed to the doors,
The
so I'm
gills,
yeah,
sure.
to the gills,
yeah.
yeah.
I guess I should say I teach one of the most popular electives in the fall, and it's
Okay.
entrepreneurship in existing organizations. And it was sort of mentioned at the beginning, but I do think that there is a moment now where if you can be an entrepreneur, I've written cases on Google, on General Motors, on Hearst, on JB Hunt, the trucking transportation business, at EY, et cetera, that these traditional big platform companies have a huge amount of data. And if
Right.
you can be an entrepreneur and harness that data, you have a new frontier for entrepreneurship at scale. And
Right.
so that class is really attractive to a lot of Stanford MBAs because they're trying to figure out, how can you advance yourself with this data question and with the AI question and do it quickly. And I think if
Right.
you can carve out the right position at a big company, that's going to really move the needle going forward.
And actually, so let me take the next question to that since it's more closer to home. For me, I have a senior in high school going into college, right? And so a lot of young people are wondering, well, I don't even know where this is going to go. Companies are spending billions of dollars. You're dealing with M&A, I'm sorry, MBA people who actually have
Right.
experience, right? Are
Right.
investing in education so they have something to leverage so they can know what to do. What do you talk to the people who are just starting out? Is there skill sets that they can hone? Or is it information? What kind of skill sets? Is it just mindset? How do they, prepare themselves to be ready for this new world?
I think it's critical thinking and it's learning. And so I think it matters less, what your major might be in college. But I think that you have to be very able to sift and sort information and think critically about it. And I is likely, this is a thing I actually worry about organizationally, is if AI takes all the jobs of junior people in accounting firms and
Right.
law firms
Lawyers,
and
yeah.
Right.
yeah, and finance and everything else. What do you do if you're coming out of school? Because you need to be able to apprentice, right? You need to be
Right.
able to do what in our careers there were, some junior jobs, and then you got to watch the senior people do
Right.
what they did, right? And so I do think it's a challenge for people that are just going to be getting started.
Right.
But the best advice I have is learn quickly, pick up technology tools very with agility, right? Train yourself, keep experimenting. Every wave of this Gen AI thing, be on it, be in front of it, like be learning through it. And I would say soft skills matter more. Like when we came out of college, I think hard skills mattered.
Right.
Were you analytical?
Right.
AI will do that. Were you able to code? AI will do that. I think, increasingly people are going to need to be able to work with teams. They're going to be able to communicate using tools, but you're going to need the interpersonal skills to be able to, move your career forward. So it's a little bit different than it was 20 or 30 years ago.
Absolutely. Right.
So,
And
so in some
that's the
sense, it's being
discussions we're having.
creative, right? Like being an artist, being creative, thinking like differently than everybody else, in essence,
Also
right?
connecting with people, communicating. She's
Of
saying, but also
course.
staying on top of technology. You can't just be like, well, I'm a great marketer, but if you can't actually get anything done, I mean, then you're just as you're the next wealth manager is just trying to take you out to lunch, right? Versus actually knowing how to do something.
Yeah.
That's no offense. I have a name for that person. That's
I
why
was just
Ben's
say,
laughing.
you should tell her.
I call it Trevor. Trevor
Okay.
is your I'm not going to name the firm wealth manager who likes to take you out to lunch and give you a big
Very good
paper
looking
book.
guy,
Good
very
looking
slick
guy, slick
hair.
back hair, nice suit, or
You might have
a
been a
little bit dressed
banker
up
with
for that.
some of them,
Might have been a
Trevor's, when
banker, but then it's
your
like, you know what?
days.
I just want to like make some money and go golfing with people, but doesn't really do anything, right? Like those kind of people, they can communicate, but and maybe there's a role, but you need to have hopefully some other skills too that you're bringing tables so people respect you and you get stuff done.
Yeah,
But
you need to,
that's my
I think,
yeah, that's my
I
view.
think you need to be able
That's
to
your
use
rant.
the latest and breaking tools. You need to be able to harness them.
Right.
That is going to be the big thing,
Yeah.
right? And you can't have a lot of delay in picking up the latest technology because it's going to move so fast.
Well, Amy, we could spend hours with you. I know we just spent over an hour with you. So thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and experience with us today. And we appreciate letting our listeners know where they can find you. And I'm sure they're going to follow up. So thank you so
Great,
much.
great.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
This has been fun. Yeah. Thanks, you guys.